The Spartan Wedding Night Kidnapping. If you are a young woman of marriage age in Sparta, then you honestly shouldn't be expecting any sort of romantic proposal or even a wedding ring because these guys were honestly just built differently. First off, you'll be kidnapped. Yep, kidnapped on your freaking wedding day. No romantic proposals, no candlelit dinners, no "will you marry me?" Just some guy snatching you up like a Black Friday deal. This was because in Sparta, the wedding process was less of a big day and more of a big yikes. The groom, with the help of his friends, would literally abduct his bride-to-be and carry her off, and it was totally acceptable because it was tradition. Now, you'd think that after the oh-so-romantic abduction, the groom would maybe, I don't know, shower his bride with gifts or at least try to impress her? Nope. Instead, the bride had to go through a serious Spartan glow-down before the wedding night. First, she had to shave her head completely bald, then she was forced to dress like a little boy wearing a simple tunic and zero makeup, and then finally she'd be left alone in a dark room, just waiting. Once the bride was sitting in her dark, depressing waiting room, the groom had one last step before officially sealing the deal. He had to sneak in under cover of darkness, spend the night with her, and then leave before sunrise. Yep, you heard that right. Their first night as a married couple was more like a one-night stand with extra steps. It actually gets worse because, fun fact, Spartan men weren't even allowed to live with their wives after marriage. So basically, this poor woman just got kidnapped, bald-headed, thrown in a room alone, snuck up on by a guy in the dark, then left before morning. If that's not the weirdest mix of horror movie and romance novel, I don't know what is. The Japanese night-crawling tradition. Yobai, which literally means night crawling, was an ancient Japanese courtship tradition where men would sneak into a woman's bedroom at night for a surprise romantic visit. And no, the woman would not be expecting you, so it was just a straight-up home invasion with a dash of hope. Apparently, the goal behind this was to woo her through silent companionship. Or, more. Now, once inside, the man would carefully crawl into her bed. Now, this was the make-or-break moment as he had to gently place himself beside her and wait. If she accepted him, she'd stay silent, maybe even cuddle up. But if she rejected him, she'd either pretend to be asleep or call her family to chase him out with a wooden club. Ouch. And just like that, it was either a love story or a police report in the making. Now, whilst this makes absolutely no sense to us now, you've got to understand that in feudal Japan, arranged marriages were common. So this gave young people a way to test the waters before being forced into a loveless union. So in a way, Yobai was like trial dating, but instead of dinner and a movie, it was sneaking into someone's house uninvited and trying to have sex. If you think this is romantic, please subscribe. Ancient Egyptian necrophilia prevention. Let's just imagine you're an ancient Egyptian mortician just trying to get through another day of wrapping mummies and dealing with the smell of 4,000-year-old body funk. You're in the embalming chambers, swatting away flies, when a fresh, young, beautiful woman's dead body arrives. But just as you're about to start mummifying it, your supervisor glares at you, arms crossed. "Hey, buddy, I know what you're thinking. Am I getting a raise? No, and also don't even think about doing anything weird." Because apparently in ancient Egypt, that was a serious concern. As we all probably know by now, ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, but even they had to draw the line somewhere. And that line was necrophilia, which, horrifyingly enough, was an actual problem. Some morticians couldn't keep their hands to themselves, and grieving families knew it. So what did the Egyptians do? They invented a corpse cool-down period. Apparently, before embalming a young or beautiful woman, her family would let her decompose a little first. Yes, they literally delayed the funeral just to make her less attractive. Because as it turns out, nothing says off-limits quite like a little rotting flesh and a side of maggots. It was the world's first anti-thirst strategy. However, this practice wasn't just an overprotective family thing, as it became a widespread custom. Priests, nobles, and anyone with an attractive wife or daughter insisted that she not be embalmed right away. The The idea being that if she's stinky, bloated, and fallen apart, nobody's gonna want to do anything unholy, which honestly should have been the default, but here we are. But seriously though, if you need a corpse to be rotting before you leave it alone, you should not be in charge of corpses. Roman public virginity tests. First off, in order for you to understand what this entire madness was about, you need to first understand its origin. Apparently, in ancient Rome, women were selected at birth to be a Vestal Virgin for 30 years. And their whole job revolved around keeping the sacred fire of Vesta burning because apparently matches weren't invented yet. Now, to keep this fire burning, all you had to do was remain a virgin. Simple enough, right? Well, wrong. Because if the fire mistakenly goes out for any other possible reason, the Romans thought it was because a Vestal had broken her vow, aka someone had been getting busy behind the temple. And if that happened, well, it was time for an investigation. And it gets worse, because the Romans decided that the best candidates to carry out this so-called investigation would be a bunch of old men. Yep, let that sink in. Basically, to go check if you were still a pristine, untouched beacon of chastity, a group of Roman priests and medical professionals, who, mind you, still thought diseases came from angry gods, would gather in a room while you sat there and got examined. According to them, they believed that a woman's body would physically change if she had lost her purity. No hymen checks, no actual science, just a bunch of dudes making wild guesses. Her skin looks too radiant. She must be guilty. She's standing too confidently. Definitely not a virgin. Her vibe is off. Bury her alive. Oh, I forgot to mention, the penalty for being found guilty was to be buried alive. You'd be led through the streets in a funeral procession for yourself while you were still breathing. Then be taken to an underground tomb, given a small loaf of bread and a candle while getting bricked in forever. Yeah, no appeal, no second chances, just goodbye forever, hope you like the dark. The Babylonian temple prostitution ritual. We can all agree that ancient civilizations had their fair share of bizarre traditions, but few were as intriguing and downright puzzling as Babylon's temple prostitution ritual. Apparently, in Babylon, every woman had to offer herself to a complete stranger at the temple of Ishtar, all in the name of religion. This practice was seen as a divine duty, honoring Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of love, fertility, and war. Here's how it played out. A woman would enter the temple and take a seat, waiting patiently for a man to approach. But unlike modern dating, where you can swipe left, she had no say in who chose her. So when a man made his selection, he would toss a coin at her feet and recite a sacred phrase, usually something along the lines of, "In the name of Ishtar, let's make this divine." She had to accept the first coin given to her, no exceptions. This meant that whether the suitor was young and handsome or old and smelled like fermented goat milk, she was bound by religious duty. Imagine being forced into divine OnlyFans, but without the profit. After accepting the coin, the couple would retreat to a private chamber within the temple to complete the ritual. Once done, the woman was free to leave, marry, and live her life without needing to return. Her sacred duty was fulfilled. The belief was that this act pleased Ishtar, ensuring fertility for the city and strengthened Babylon's divine protection. Yeah, right. For some women, this process was swift and painless, with the suitor arriving immediately. Others, however, were not as lucky. If a woman wasn't chosen quickly, she could wait for days, even weeks, watching as others were selected before her. Few things in history could have been as devastating to self-esteem as sitting in a temple watching every other woman get picked while you sat there collecting dust for something you didn't even want to do in the first place. Ancient Rome, Lupercalia Festival. Imagine if Valentine's Day and a frat party had a baby and that baby was raised by wolves, literally. That's Lupercalia, ancient Rome's original swipe right festival. Except instead of swiping, men ran through the streets half-naked, whipping women with goat skin for fertility. But before we get into the sweaty half-naked details, let's talk about where this madness came from. Lupercalia was held every February 13th through the 15th, dedicated to Lupercus, the Roman god of fertility, agriculture, and wild animals, basically the god of let's get it on. However, it also honored Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome who were raised by a she-wolf in a cave called Lupercal. And, well, nothing says Happy Founders Day like a bunch of men sprinting through the city in minimal clothing, whipping women and hoping to get lucky. Now, like most ancient festivals, Lupercalia kicked off with a solid animal sacrifice. The Romans, being the extra folks they were, went straight for a goat, symbolizing fertility. Young Roman men from noble families would gather at the Lupercal cave on Palatine Hill to slaughter the goat, smear its blood on their foreheads, wipe it off with milk, and then laugh hysterically, possibly because they realized how ridiculous they looked. Once they were sufficiently bloodied up and buzzed on adrenaline and probably wine, the Luperci would take strips of the freshly sacrificed goat skin called februa, and any woman who wanted to be extra fertile that year would step forward and willingly get smacked by these goat skin whips. Yes, women literally lined up to get whipped. Apparently, in Roman society, it was believed that being lightly flogged by a goat hide strip would bless you with fertility and painless childbirth. In today's world, we go to doctors for that. Back then, you got slapped by a half-naked man holding a piece of goat. Different times, guys. Different times. But just when you thought this festival couldn't get any weirder, Rome decided to speed up the dating process because at some point in Lupercalia history, the Romans added a love lottery to spice things up. Basically, single men and women would put their names in a jar, a random drawing would pair them up. And just like that, they were now a couple for the festival, and sometimes longer if the chemistry was good. Think of it as Rome's version of blind date, and honestly, given modern dating struggles, maybe the Romans were onto something. Indigenous tribes, rites of passage. If dating today feels like a confusing mess of swiping, ghosting, and sending WYD texts at 2 a.m., just imagine how intense it was when your entire village was in your love life. So, in many indigenous tribes, romance wasn't just a personal journey, it was a full-on community event, complete with ceremonies, tests, and sometimes public dance-offs. You had to earn your right to be someone's future baby daddy or mama. In some tribes, you do this by either hunting a wild animal, wrestling a crocodile, or surviving in the forest alone for days. I mean, what better way to prove your love? For instance, boys in the Sambia tribe didn't just grow up and slide into adulthood smoothly like we do today. They actually had to go through a brutal initiation process to prove they were man enough for marriage. First, they were taken from their mothers at an early age and sent to live with the male elders. Then came painful nose-bleeding rituals and endurance tests because nothing says romance ready like bleeding out of your face. Only after years of training, strength building, and proving they could be brave warriors were they considered ready to return to the village and find a wife. In the Krayong tribe, parents actually build small huts for their daughters where they can spend time getting to know potential suitors. The young woman has complete control over who she invites inside and can date multiple men until she finds the one she actually wants to marry. Also, there's no pressure, so if she doesn't vibe with a guy, she just moves on to the next one. Basically, she was living in an ancient version of a reality dating show, except way more practical. Some tribes, like the Kyrgyzstaniban, take things a step bolder. Basically, if a guy wanted a wife, he would literally kidnap her. After kidnapping her, he'd bring her to his family's home and try to convince her to stay. If she agreed, a wedding was arranged. If she refused, she was allowed to return home, though in some cases family pressure made it harder to say no. Thankfully, this practice has evolved over time, and in modern Kyrgyzstan, non-consensual kidnappings are illegal, but the ritual still exists in certain rural areas. Honestly, the one thing that's very clear in all of this is that these indigenous traditions make modern dating apps look boring. Polynesian cultures, fertility dances. Just imagine it's a warm, tropical night. The scent of hibiscus and ocean breeze fills the air, and a group of men and women step into a fire-lit clearing, moving to the hypnotic beat of drums. Their hips sway in perfect rhythm, their hands weave through the air like waves, and the entire village watches as they literally dance their way into the good graces of love, gods, and future babies. These fertility dances were more than just entertainment. They were sacred, symbolic, and, let's be real, kinda seductive. Different Polynesian islands had their own versions, but the main goal was the same: celebrate fertility, honor creation, and maybe, just maybe, impress a future mate. And you thought dating was hard now? Try winning someone over with nothing but perfectly timed hip thrusts and graceful hand motions. Plus, Polynesians didn't have written languages, so dances became history books with rhythm, passing down myths, traditions, and lessons through movement. Now, you'd think everyone would appreciate the beauty and significance of these dances, right? Well, European colonizers apparently didn't, because they showed up and basically said, "Oh, that's too much, shut it down." You see, when the missionaries and Westerners arrived in the 18th and 19th centuries, they were shocked by how expressive, sensual, and uninhibited these dances were. They banned or suppressed many of them, labeling them as immoral or pagan. Basically, they saw people celebrating life, love, and fertility through movement and said, "Nope, too spicy for us." Thankfully, Polynesian cultures have fought to preserve and revive these traditions, keeping their meaning and beauty alive today. Japanese Shinto Kanamara Matsuri. If Japan had a contest for most unexpectedly hilarious religious festival, Kanamara Matsuri would win, hands down. I mean, this is the only event where you'll see giant, brightly colored penises paraded through the streets, sold as candy, and worshipped with utmost seriousness. Yes, you heard that right, a whole festival dedicated to the phallus. Well, basically, Kanamara Matsuri, which translates to Festival of the Steel Phallus, yeah, for real, is a Shinto fertility festival celebrated every April in Kawasaki, Japan. The event centers around a giant steel penis housed in the Kanayama Shrine, which surprisingly has been a sacred place of worship for centuries. Now, before you assume this is some kind of modern joke, this festival has deep historical roots. The Shinto religion sees fertility as sacred, and in ancient times, people prayed for protection, prosperity, and, yes, good sexual health. But how did we go from spiritual fertility prayers to parading massive pink penises through the streets? Apparently, like all great traditions, Kanamara Matsuri had an origin story, and it's absolutely bonkers. According to legend, a young woman in Japan had a very serious problem. A demon had taken up residence inside her vagina. And not just any demon, this one had razor-sharp teeth and a bad attitude, so every time she tried to consummate a marriage, the demon bit off her husband's equipment. Yes, this is an actual legend. No, I did not make this up. After 2 very unfortunate wedding nights ending in brutal dismemberments, the woman was understandably frustrated. But instead of just giving up on love forever, she sought help from a blacksmith, who had the best and most questionable solution ever conceived. He forged a steel penis and told the woman to use it as a trap, and when she did, the demon chomped down on the metal phallus, broke all its teeth, and fled forever. And thus, the steel phallus became a sacred object of protection. Because if it could defeat a demon, it could probably help with fertility, STDs, and other sensitive problems. After that whole demon tooth fiasco, the Kanayama Shrine became a go-to place for people who wanted divine protection for their private parts. And as the centuries passed, the festival grew into what it is today, a massive, lighthearted, and outrageously fun celebration of life, love, and the mighty phallus.